They say weakness is a death sentence in a wolf pack. I learned that truth the day I was born, smaller than my siblings, quieter than the others, less of everything a wolf should be. My pack, the Silver Moon, didn't cast me out. That would have been merciful. Instead, they kept me as a living reminder of what happens when the bloodline falters, when nature makes a mistake. I was that mistake. The Omega who couldn't shift properly, whose wolf form flickered like a dying flame, whose human body bore the scars of transformations that never quite completed. I existed in the spaces between, never fully one thing or another, and in a world that demanded absolute certainty, I was an abomination of doubt. Every transformation was agony. While other wolves shifted in seconds, their bodies flowing seamlessly between forms, my shifts took minutes of excruciating pain. My bones would crack and reform only to crack again. My muscles tearing and healing incompletely, my wolf flickering in and out of existence like a candle in a storm. I'd stopped trying to shift in front of others by the time I was 10, the shame of their pitying looks or disgusted sneers burning worse than the physical pain. The healers had examined me countless times in my youth, their hands prodding and their magic probing, searching for an explanation for my defect. They'd found nothing, or so they'd claimed. Eventually, they'd stopped trying, writing me off as a lost cause, a genetic anomaly that happened sometimes when bloodlines grew too insular. No one questioned it. No one thought to look deeper. Why would they? I was just an Omega, and Omegas were already the lowest rank. A broken Omega was simply more broken than most. My name is Sage, though most in the pack simply called me the Broken One when they bothered to acknowledge me at all. I lived in the smallest cabin at the edge of our territory, where the wards were weakest and the forest pressed close with its ancient hunger. The cabin wasn't given to me out of cruelty, though cruelty was certainly present. It was practical. If something breached our borders, I would be the first to die, the expendable early warning system that might buy the real wolves a few precious seconds. I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself that having walls and a roof was more than some Omegas received from crueler packs. I told myself so many lies in those years that I almost believed them. Almost. But late at night, when the moon called to the wolf I couldn't fully become, when I felt the incomplete transformation burning through my veins like acid, I knew the truth. I was dying slowly, fading a little more each month, and no one cared enough to notice. The isolation should have broken me completely. There were days when I didn't see another soul, when the only sounds were the wind through the trees and the distant howls of pack runs I wasn't invited to join. I'd learned to be invisible, to move through the territory like a ghost, gathering what I needed and retreating before anyone had to acknowledge my presence. The market days were worst. Watching families laugh together, seeing mates touch with casual affection, observing the easy camaraderie of wolves who belonged. I'd buy my meager supplies with the small stipend the pack provided, keeping my eyes down, making myself as small as possible. And then I'd flee back to my cabin where I could pretend the loneliness didn't hurt quite so much. But loneliness has a way of growing teeth when you're not looking, gnawing at you from the inside until you forget what it feels like to be whole. I'd started talking to myself, just to hear a voice. I'd started counting days by the phases of the moon rather than any meaningful events. I'd started to wonder if maybe it would be easier to just walk into the forest and not come back. And then Luna had appeared on my doorstep, and everything had changed. No one except the children. They came to me in secret. The pups who were too small or too strange or too soft for the harsh training regimen our alpha demanded. I never asked them to come. The first one simply appeared one morning, a girl named Luna with eyes too large for her face and a stutter that made the other wolves mock her mercilessly. She'd been crying, her small face streaked with dirt and tears, and she'd looked at me with such desperate hope that something in my chest cracked open. I'd given her water and a place to sit, and I'd told her that her stutter didn't make her weak. It made her careful with words, thoughtful about what she chose to say. The lie became truth in her eyes, and she'd left standing taller. After that, they kept coming. The boy who couldn't control his shift, his name was Finn, and he was terrified of himself, of the wolf that burst forth at unpredictable moments, destroying things and scaring the other pups. I'd taught him breathing exercises, meditation techniques I'd developed during my own agonizing shifts, and slowly he'd learned to find the calm at the center of his storm. The girl who was afraid of blood, Sweet Kara, who wanted to be a healer but fainted at the sight of injuries. I'd started with plant work, teaching her about herbs and remedies, letting her build confidence before gradually introducing her to the reality of healing work. The twins whose parents had died and left them adrift in a pack that valued strength over grief. Marcus and Maya, who clung to each other like the last solid thing in a shifting world. I'd given them space to mourn, permission to be sad, and slowly they'd begun to trust that it was okay to be vulnerable sometimes, that grief didn't make them weak, but human. There were others, too, over the years. The pup with 3 legs who'd been written off as useless until I'd shown him how speed and determination could compensate for what he lacked. The girl who was too gentle for combat training but could track a scent through running water and understand the forest's whispers better than anyone. The boy who was brilliant with strategy but froze in physical confrontations. I became their sanctuary, their secret, the place where they could be small and scared without judgment. I taught them what I could: how to move quietly, how to read the forest, how to survive when you weren't the strongest, how to find worth in the things the pack didn't value. They called me Miss Sage, with a reverence I didn't deserve, and I loved them with a ferocity that terrified me because I knew I couldn't protect them from the world that would eventually demand they be something other than what they were. But I could give them tools. I could give them kindness. I could show them that there were different ways to be strong, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to help them survive. Everything changed the night the Alpha King came to Silvermoon. We'd heard rumors for weeks. The king was touring the packs, assessing their strength, their loyalty, their worth. Some said he was looking for traitors who'd sided with the rebel faction in the Northern Territories. Others whispered he was searching for something, though no one could agree on what. A few of the older wolves spoke in hushed tones about ancient prophecies and fated mates, but those stories were dismissed as romantic nonsense by the more practical members of the pack. Our alpha, Marcus, had worked us all into a frenzy of preparation. The territory had to be immaculate, every inch of borderland patrolled and secured. The wolves had to be impressive, showcasing our pack's strength through elaborate demonstrations and carefully choreographed displays. The pack house had been scrubbed until it gleamed, and the finest game had been hunted for the welcome feast. Marcus had barked orders for days, his temper shorter than usual, his demands impossible. Everyone was on edge, desperate not to be the one who embarrassed Silvermoon in front of the king, and I had to be invisible. Marcus made that abundantly clear. He'd come to my cabin 3 days before the king's arrival, his presence filling my small space with barely contained violence. "Stay in your cabin," he'd snarled at me during the only direct conversation we'd had in months. "If the king sees you, if he knows we harbor such weakness, he might question our pack's viability." Do you understand what that means, Omega? It means death for all of us because you couldn't be normal. His hand had shot out, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "I've allowed you to live here out of mercy, but that mercy has limits. Stay hidden, stay quiet, and maybe we'll all survive this inspection." I'd nodded, mute and obedient as always, and I'd meant to comply. I truly had. I'd gathered extra supplies, prepared to lock myself in the cabin for however long the king's visit lasted, ready to be the invisible ghost they needed me to be. But then I'd heard Luna screaming in the forest, and everything I was, broken, weak, worthless, became irrelevant in the face of her terror. I'd found her cornered by a rogue, a wolf gone feral and mad, its eyes reflecting nothing but hunger and violence. Rogues were wolves who'd rejected or been exiled from pack life, living solitary and often descending into madness without the stabilizing influence of pack bonds. This one was gaunt, its ribs showing through matted fur, its movements twitchy and unpredictable. It had backed Luna against an ancient oak tree, and she was frozen with terror, her small body pressed against the rough bark, her eyes wide and glassy with shock. The rogue was circling closer, savoring her fear, and I could see it calculating which would be more satisfying, the quick kill or the prolonged chase. Luna's lips were moving, but no sound came out, her stutter completely locking her voice in her throat. She saw me emerge from the tree line, and hope flared in her eyes, quickly followed by fear. Not for herself anymore, but for me. She knew what I was, knew I couldn't fight, knew I was walking toward my death. But what choice did I have? This child who trusted me, who came to my cabin seeking safety, who called me Miss Sage with such reverence? I couldn't let her die while I ran to save myself. I didn't think. Thinking was a luxury for wolves who had something to lose. I threw myself between them, my incomplete shift tearing through me with agonizing familiarity. My bones cracked and reformed again, my muscles screaming in protest as my wolf tried desperately to manifest. I was half-shifted, caught between forms in a way that was horrifying to witness. But I was there, and I was loud, and I was willing to die if it meant Luna had seconds to run. Run! I screamed at her, my voice distorted by the partial shift. Run and find help. But Luna didn't run. She was rooted in place, crying now, tears streaming down her face as she watched me face down the rogue. The rogue's attention had shifted to me, its lip curling back in something like amusement. Here was a broken thing, trying to play hero. It would be fun to tear me apart. The rogue lunged, faster than I expected, and its claws caught my shoulder, spinning me around. I felt the hot rush of blood, the sharp clarity that comes when you realize this is how it will end. Not slowly fading in my cabin, but here, doing something that mattered. The rogue's breath was hot on my face as it lunged again, and I braced for the killing blow that never came. Instead, there was a sound like thunder, a presence that made every hair on my body stand on end, and the rogue was simply gone, torn away by something massive and silver and ancient. I fell to my knees, my vision blurring, my body trying desperately to heal wounds it didn't have the strength to close. Through the haze of pain, I saw him. The wolf was enormous, easily twice the size of any I'd ever seen, his fur the color of moonlight on steel, his eyes burning gold with power that made my incomplete wolf whimper and bow inside my chest. He shifted then, the transformation so fluid and perfect it was like watching art, and became a man who carried that same terrible beauty. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face all hard angles and fierce intensity. He moved toward me with predatory grace, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was looking at the Alpha King. I also knew I was about to die because I'd broken the cardinal rule. I'd been seen. "Don't move," he said, his voice deep and commanding, vibrating through my bones. He knelt beside me, and his scent hit me like a physical force, pine and lightning and something wild that made my broken wolf surge with desperate longing. His hands were on my shoulder, warm and impossibly gentle, and power flowed from his touch into my wound. I gasped as my flesh began to knit itself back together, proper healing for the first time in my life, and the relief was so intense, It brought tears to my eyes. "Who are you?" he asked, his golden eyes searching my face with an intensity that made me feel naked, exposed, seen in a way I'd never experienced. I opened my mouth to answer, but Luna beat me to it. She'd crept closer, her fear of the king apparently less than her concern for me, and she threw her small body against mine, her arms wrapping around me protectively. "This is Miss Sage," Luna said fiercely, her stutter completely absent. "She saved me. She's the bravest wolf in the whole pack." The king's eyes never left my face, and something shifted in his expression, something I couldn't read but that made my heart hammer against my ribs. "Is she?" he murmured, and I heard a world of meaning in those two words. If you're loving this story of hidden strength and fated encounters, comment below with your favorite supernatural romance trope, and don't forget to subscribe for more Shifter Tales. Marcus found us minutes later, and the fury on his face would have been terrifying if I hadn't been so focused on the way the king had positioned himself slightly in front of me, a subtle but unmistakable protective stance. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage and fear. "I apologize for this disturbance. This Omega was instructed to remain in her cabin. She has no business being in your presence." He reached for me, his intention to drag me away clear, but the king's hand shot out, catching Marcus's wrist with casual strength that made our alpha freeze. "This Omega," the king said softly, dangerously, "just killed a rogue that somehow breached your territory and threatened a child. While your warriors were apparently busy preparing performances for my visit, she was actually protecting your pack." The air grew heavy with the king's power, and I watched Marcus's face go pale. "Tell me, Alpha Marcus, what exactly makes her unworthy of my presence? The fact that she acted without hesitation? The courage she displayed? Or is it something else?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, his eyes darting to me, with pure hatred. "She's weak, Your Majesty. Her wolf is broken. She can barely shift. And yet she shifted to save a child when your strong, unbroken wolves did not." The king interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. "Strength is not merely physical power, Alpha Marcus. It is also courage, loyalty, and the will to act when others will not. This Omega possesses all three." He turned to me then, his expression softening in a way that made my breath catch. "What is your name?" "Sage," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Sage," he repeated, as if tasting my name, savoring it. "I am Theron, and I have a proposition for you." The proposition was insane. Theron wanted me to come with him to the capital, to serve in his court, to be under his personal protection. Marcus had sputtered protests about pack law, about ownership, about rights and traditions, but Theron had silenced him with a look. "She is Omega," the king had said coldly. "By your own pack's treatment of her, she has no rights you're bound to respect. I am invoking my authority as Alpha King to remove her from your pack for her own safety. Unless you'd like me to investigate further into how an Omega came to live in a cabin at the edge of your territory, completely unprotected, while a rogue roamed your lands." Marcus had gone silent, and I'd understood then that Theron was offering me a choice that wasn't really a choice but was more freedom than I'd ever had. I'd looked at Luna, at the other pups who had crept closer, their faces stricken with the fear of losing their sanctuary, and my heart had cracked. "The children," I'd said, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "I can't leave them." Theron had studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then they come too," he'd said simply. "Any pup who wishes to leave Silvermoon under my protection may do so. We have excellent schools at the capital, trainers who understand that strength comes in many forms." The hope that had blazed in those small faces would haunt me forever. 7 pups total had chosen to come, Luna among them. And as we'd prepared to leave, I'd felt the weight of responsibility settle over me like a mantle. I was responsible for them now, truly responsible, and the terror of that was matched only by the fierce determination that I would not fail them. The journey to the capital took 3 days, and every mile felt like crossing into a different world. Theron's pack, the royal guard, treated me with a careful respect that I didn't understand. They didn't sneer at my incomplete shifts or mock my weakness. Instead, they seemed to take their cues from their king, and Theron's attention to me was constant and confusing. He made sure I had the best sleeping arrangements in the camps we set up each night, the finest food from their supplies, and he checked on the pups with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his fierce reputation. The pups themselves were adjusting to the journey with remarkable resilience. Luna stuck close to me, her small hand often finding mine, but the others were slowly relaxing around the royal guard. Finn had struck up a conversation with one of the warriors about shift control, and I'd watched in amazement as the warrior had shared his own struggles with learning to master his wolf, treating Finn like an equal rather than a defective pup. Kara had been fascinated by the royal healer who traveled with us, peppering her with questions about herbs and treatments. The twins had found comfort in the structured routine of the Guards' March, the predictability soothing after years of chaos. Watching them begin to trust, to hope, made my heart ache with fierce protectiveness. On the second night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd found him sitting watch by the fire, and he'd invited me to join him with a gesture. We'd sat in silence for a while, the crackling flames between us, and I'd studied him covertly in the firelight. He was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional handsomeness, all sharp edges and contained power, with eyes that saw too much and carried the weight of responsibility for every wolf under his protection. There was a loneliness to him too, I realized, the isolation that came from standing at the top, from being the one everyone looked to but no one could truly reach. "Your wolf," he'd said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "It's not broken, it's trapped." I'd stared at him, not understanding, my heart beginning to pound with something that might have been hope. "When I touched you to heal your wound, I felt your wolf. She's strong, Sage. Incredibly strong. But something is binding her, keeping her from fully manifesting. It feels like a curse or a deliberate suppression." The words had hit me like a physical blow. A curse. Not a natural defect, but something done to me. Someone had done this to me deliberately. "Why?" I'd whispered, my voice raw. "Who would do that?" Theron's jaw had clenched, his eyes reflecting gold in the firelight. "Someone who feared what you might become," he'd said. "Someone who needed you weak." The implications had cascaded through my mind, and I'd felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger. "Can it be undone?" I'd asked. Theron had looked at me then, really looked at me, and the intensity in his gaze had stolen my breath. "Yes," he'd said, "but it will be painful. And once your wolf is free, everything will change. You'll be powerful, Sage. Possibly more powerful than wolves who have spent their entire lives telling you that you're worthless." He'd paused, his hand reaching out to brush my cheek with heartbreaking tenderness. "Are you ready for that?" I'd thought of Luna, of all the pups sleeping peacefully nearby because they trusted me to keep them safe. I'd thought of every moment I'd felt weak, broken, less than. I'd thought of the cabin at the edge of territory, the death sentence wrapped in the illusion of shelter. "Yes," I'd said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. "I'm ready." Let us know in the comments what you think is binding Sage's wolf, ancient curse or pack betrayal. Subscribe to find out what happens next. The capital was magnificent in a way that made my small existence in Silvermoon feel like a half-remembered dream. The royal pack's territory sprawled across a valley surrounded by mountains, the buildings a mix of ancient stone and modern architecture that spoke of a pack, both rooted in tradition and reaching toward the future. Wolves moved through the streets with purpose and confidence, but also with an ease I'd never seen in Silvermoon. There was laughter here, casual affection, a sense of community that went beyond mere pack hierarchy. Theron's manor was at the heart of it all, a massive structure that somehow felt warm despite its size. Stone walls that had stood for centuries were softened by climbing ivy and window boxes full of flowers. The interior was equally impressive. High ceilings, elegant furnishings, but also lived-in spaces with worn rugs and comfortable chairs, signs that this was a home, not just a symbol of power. I'd been given rooms in the family wing, a placement that had caused whispers among the court wolves I'd glimpsed on our arrival. The family wing was reserved for blood relatives and mates, not rescued Omegas, but Theron had been firm in his directive, and no one dared question the Alpha King directly. My rooms were larger than my entire cabin had been, a bedroom with a bed so soft I'd been afraid to lie in it at first, a sitting room with a fireplace and shelves full of books, a bathroom with hot running water and a tub deep enough to submerge in completely. It was luxury beyond anything I'd imagined, and it made me feel exposed and out of place. I didn't belong in spaces this beautiful. I didn't know how to inhabit them without feeling like an imposter. The pups had been settled in a special dormitory with other young wolves, under the care of teachers and trainers who had greeted them with genuine warmth. I'd met the dormitory master, an older wolf named Elena, who reminded me of what a grandmother should be. All soft edges and fierce protective instincts. She'd taken one look at my collection of lost pups and had promised to care for them as if they were her own grandchildren. Luna had hugged me fiercely before joining the others, whispering that she'd be brave, that she'd make me proud. Watching them settle in, seeing the wonder in their eyes as they explored their new home, had brought tears to mine. For the first time since we'd left Silvermoon, I'd allowed myself to relax fractionally. They were safe. Whatever happened to me now, they were safe. That night, Theron had summoned me to his private study, and I'd gone with my heart hammering, unsure what to expect. The study was smaller than I'd anticipated, more intimate, with dark wood paneling and books lining every wall. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the scent of pine and old paper mixed with Theron's distinctive scent in a way that was oddly comforting. He'd been standing by the window when I'd entered, his silhouette backlit by moonlight, and when he'd turned to face me, the expression on his face had been raw with something I couldn't name. "Before we break the curse," he'd said without preamble, "I need to tell you something. I need you to understand why I'm doing this, why I brought you here, why I couldn't leave you in that pack." He'd crossed to me, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body, smell his intoxicating scent. "From the moment I saw you throw yourself in front of that rogue, knowing you couldn't win but doing it anyway, I knew. You're my mate, Sage. My true mate." The word had hung in the air between us, impossible and perfect and terrifying. Mates were rare, true mates even more so. The wolves whose souls were crafted to complement each other, whose bond could make them stronger than any individual power. I'd read about them in the old stories, never imagining that someone like me could be destined for someone like him. "That's not possible," I'd whispered, even as everything in me sang with recognition, with the rightness of his words. "I'm broken. I'm weak. I'm nothing." Theron's hands had framed my face, tilting it up to meet his eyes, and the fierce tenderness in his expression had made tears spill down my cheeks. "You are everything," he'd said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are brave and kind and strong in ways that have nothing to do with the power of your wolf. But Sage, when we free your wolf, when we break whatever curse binds you, You will be physically powerful too, strong enough to stand beside me, strong enough that no one will ever make you feel less again. His thumb had brushed away my tears. I brought you here because you're my mate. Yes. But I'm breaking this curse because you deserve to be whole. Whether you choose to accept our bond or not, whether you decide to stay or go, you deserve to know who you truly are. The choice he was offering me was staggering. Freedom without obligation, power without strings. And if I can't be what you need? I'd asked, my voice breaking. If I'm still not enough? Theron had smiled then, a true smile that transformed his fierce face into something breathtaking. You're already more than enough, he'd said, but I think you need to see that for yourself before you can believe it. The curse-breaking ritual had taken place in the sacred grove at the heart of the Pack Lands, under a full moon that painted everything silver and shadow. The grove itself was ancient, older than any living wolf, with trees that had witnessed centuries of pack history. Their branches formed a natural cathedral overhead, and moonlight filtered through the leaves in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as if the moon herself was bearing witness to what was about to happen. Theron had gathered his most trusted wolves, the Royal Guard's elite, his sister Mira, who was a powerful shaman, and surprisingly, Luna and the other pups I'd saved. They're part of your pack, Theron had explained when I'd questioned their presence. They anchor you to your purpose, to your strength. You saved them. Let them witness you saving yourself. The words had brought tears to my eyes, and I'd nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The ritual itself was agony beyond anything I'd imagined. Mira had drawn symbols on my skin with ash and moonlight, ancient marks that burned as they appeared, chanting in the old language while Theron had knelt beside me, his hand gripping mine with steady pressure. The words of the ritual washed over me, powerful and primal, awakening something deep in my bones. When the curse began to break, it felt like my body was being torn apart from the inside. Every nerve screamed, every muscle convulsed, and I felt the binding that had held my wolf captive for so long beginning to crack. I'd screamed, unable to contain the pain, and I'd felt Theron's power pouring into me, stabilizing me, keeping me anchored when I wanted nothing more than to flee into darkness. Stay with me, he'd commanded, his voice cutting through my agony. Stay with me, Sage. You're stronger than this curse. You've always been stronger. His words became my lifeline, something to focus on besides the pain. The curse had been complex, layered with malice and precision, not a natural binding but a deliberate crippling, done when I was too young to remember, designed to grow with me and keep my wolf perpetually trapped. As each layer shattered, I'd felt my wolf surge, felt her true strength and size and power finally able to manifest, and the joy of it had been as intense as the pain. She was there, fully there, not flickering or fading, but solid and present and fierce. My wolf, my true self, finally free. When it was finally over, when the last thread of the curse dissolved like smoke, I'd collapsed into Theron's arms, trembling and exhausted, and I'd heard gasps from the watching wolves. Sage, Mira had breathed, her voice filled with awe. Look at yourself. I'd managed to lift my head to look down at my body, and I'd seen the changes immediately. My skin seemed to glow with health, the chronic pain I'd learned to ignore completely absent. But more than that, I could feel my wolf, truly feel her for the first time, not flickering and fading but solid, present, powerful. Try to shift, Theron had said softly, his arms supporting me as I stood on shaking legs. I'd been afraid, conditioned by years of agony to fear the transformation, but I'd reached for my wolf anyway, and she'd risen to meet me with joy. The shift had been instant, painless, perfect. One moment I was human, the next I was wolf, and the sheer relief and rightness of it had made me want to howl. I was large, I realized. Not as large as Theron's wolf, but substantial, powerful, with fur that shimmered between silver and gold. I could feel the strength in my muscles, the sharpness of my senses, the completeness of being fully what I was meant to be. Around me, the pups had erupted into cheers, their small voices raised in celebration, and when I'd shifted back to human, Luna had thrown herself into my arms, crying happy tears against my shoulder. "You're beautiful, Miss Sage," she'd said. "You're so beautiful and strong." Theron had been watching me with an expression that made my heart stutter, and when our eyes met, I'd felt the mate bond between us flare to life, no longer suppressed by the curse's interference. The connection was overwhelming. I could feel his pride, his joy, his fierce protectiveness, and underneath it all, a love so deep it terrified me because I didn't know how to deserve it. Drop a comment if you believe in second chances and fated mates. This story is about to get even more intense. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens when Sage discovers who cursed her. The truth about the curse came 3 days later, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about my past. Mira had been investigating the magic signature left in the broken curse fragments, tracing it back through the pack archives, and what she'd found had brought her to Theron's study, where I'd been learning pack law and history, trying to understand my new role. I'd been sitting at a massive oak desk, surrounded by books that detailed centuries of pack governance, struggling to absorb information that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago, that I might have a role to play in this world, that my voice might matter. "It was your mother," Mira had said without preamble, her face grave. "Alpha Marcus's sister. She's the one who cursed you." The words hadn't made sense at first. My mother, the woman who'd died when I was 3. The vague memory of warmth and lavender scent. The ghost who haunted my dreams with fragments of lullabies and gentle touches. Had cursed me? Had deliberately crippled her own child? The betrayal felt absolute, devastating, and I'd felt tears burning behind my eyes even as confusion clouded my mind. "Why?" I'd asked, my voice hollow, barely more than a whisper. Why would a mother do that to her child? Theron had moved closer, his presence a steady comfort as Mira had continued, her eyes compassionate but unflinching. "Because she knew what you were," the shaman had explained, settling into a chair across from me. "Your mother was a seer, Sage. She had visions of the future, fragments of what might come to pass. And she saw that you would be the mate of the Alpha King. She saw that you would be powerful, that you would change the balance of power among the packs. And she saw that Marcus would try to use you as a weapon, would try to control you and through you, control the king." Mira had paused, her eyes compassionate. "So she cursed you. She bound your wolf, made you appear weak and worthless, because she believed it was the only way to keep you safe from her brother's ambitions. She died shortly after. I believe Marcus discovered what she'd done and killed her for it, though I can't prove it. But her last act was to protect you the only way she knew how." The revelation had left me reeling. My mother had crippled me to save me, had condemned me to years of suffering because she'd seen something worse in my future. And Marcus had known what I could have been and had kept me broken on purpose, not just through negligence, but through active suppression. The rage that rose in me was incandescent, my new wolf snarling with fury, and I'd felt Theron's hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "What do you want to do?" he'd asked quietly. It was the question he always asked, always giving me choice, always trusting me to know my own mind. I'd thought of Luna and the pups, of every child in Silvermoon who lived under Marcus's cruelty, of my mother who'd made an impossible choice, and I'd known what I needed to do. "I want to go back," I'd said. "I want to face him. And I want to free any wolf who wants to leave that pack." Theron had smiled, fierce and proud. Then we go to war, he'd said, but we do it the right way. Legally, publicly, with the full authority of the crown behind you. Marcus will answer for his crimes. Your mother's death, the suppression of your true nature, the abuse of pack members under his care, and you will be the one to bring him to justice. The prospect should have terrified me. A month ago, I'd been the weakest wolf in Silvermoon, afraid of my own shadow, existing on the edges of pack life. Now I was planning to destroy an alpha with the king at my side, and the law as my weapon. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was fundamental, and I was still learning to inhabit this new version of myself. The confrontation with Marcus happened at the next gathering, the quarterly meeting where all pack alphas came together to discuss territory, law, and politics. It was held in neutral territory, overseen by the Alpha King, and attendance was mandatory. Marcus had arrived with his usual entourage, his expression smug and confident, clearly expecting the matter of my removal from his pack to be a minor footnote to the proceedings. He hadn't expected me to be sitting beside Theron on the raised dais, dressed in the formal attire of the royal court, my wolf's power radiating from me in waves that made lesser wolves step back instinctively. I'd watched his face cycle through shock, disbelief, and finally fear as he'd realized what had changed, and I'd felt nothing but cold satisfaction. When Theron had called the gathering to order and announced that formal charges were being brought against the Silvermoon Alpha, the assembly had erupted in whispers. Charges against an alpha were rare, requiring substantial evidence and serious crimes. Alpha Marcus, Theron had said, his voice carrying across the key, gathered wolves with undeniable authority. You are charged with the murder of your sister, Elena Silvermoon. You are charged with the deliberate suppression and abuse of an Omega under your care. And you are charged with negligence resulting in the deaths of 3 pack members over the last 5 years, due to inadequate territory security. Each charge had been laid out with devastating precision, backed by evidence that Mira and the Royal Guard had compiled. Marcus had tried to bluster, to deny, to claim his rights as Alpha, but the proof had been overwhelming. The final blow had come when I'd stood, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. I, Sage of Silvermoon, invoke my right to challenge Alpha Marcus for crimes committed against me and my mother, Elena. The words had created shocked silence. Omega challenges were almost unheard of, and for an Omega to challenge an Alpha was unprecedented. But pack law was clear. Any wolf who had been directly harmed had the right to seek justice through challenge. Marcus had laughed, actually laughed, his confidence returning. You think you can defeat me, little Omega? Even with whatever trick the king has used to make you look strong? He'd shifted then, his wolf large and battle-scarred, a brown-gray beast that had killed more than one challenger over his years as Alpha. I'd shifted in response, and I'd heard the gasps as my true form was revealed to the gathering. Silver gold fur, size and power that marked me as far more than the broken Omega they'd heard about. We'd fought in the center of the gathering circle, and it hadn't been close. I'd spent years learning to survive, to read opponents, to find advantages in impossible situations. Marcus had spent years relying on brute strength and the submission of weaker wolves. He'd been faster, but I'd been smarter. He'd been vicious, but I'd been precise. And when I'd finally had him pinned, my jaws at his throat, I'd shifted back to human, looking down at the Alpha who'd made my life hell. Yield, I'd said softly, yield and face trial, or die here. He'd yielded, his eyes filled with hatred but his will broken, and I'd felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but closure, justice. Theron had taken over then, formally removing Marcus from his position and placing Silvermoon under temporary royal oversight until a new alpha could be established through proper channels. As I'd walked back to his side, covered in blood and dirt but standing tall, the gathered alphas had parted from me, respect and wariness in their expressions. I wasn't just an Omega anymore. I was a wolf who'd challenged an alpha and won. I was the Alpha King's mate. I was someone who mattered. That night, alone with Theron in his private chambers, I'd finally allowed myself to break down. The weight of everything, the curse, my mother's sacrifice, the confrontation with Marcus, the sheer, overwhelming change my life had undergone had crashed over me, and I'd sobbed against Theron's chest while he'd held me, steady and patient and unshakably present. I don't know how to be this person, I'd admitted when I could finally speak. I don't know how to be strong. I've spent my whole life being weak. Theron had tilted my face up to his golden eyes fierce and tender. You've always been strong, Sage. Strength isn't the absence of fear or pain. It's moving forward despite them. You've been doing that your entire life. You just didn't recognize it as strength because it didn't look like what everyone told you strength should be. His thumb had brushed my cheek. You saved those pups when you had nothing. You faced a rogue when you knew you couldn't win. You survived years of abuse and isolation without becoming cruel or bitter. That's real strength. The kind that can't be taught or given, only revealed. His words had settled something in me. And when he'd kissed me, gentle and questioning, I'd kissed him back with all the emotion I couldn't put into words. The mate bond had blazed between us, and I'd felt his love, his pride, his absolute certainty that I was exactly what he needed, what the pack needed, what the world needed. For the first time in my life, I'd believed I might be enough. Want to see how Sage transforms from Omega to Queen? Comment more and smash that subscribe button. The next part reveals secrets that will change everything. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change and growth. I'd formally accepted the mate bond with Theron, and the ceremony had been witnessed by all the royal pack and broadcast to the other packs. A declaration that I was their queen, their alpha female, and that my word carried the weight of law. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The pups I'd saved had thrived in their new environment, growing confident and strong under trainers who valued different kinds of strength. Luna had discovered she had a gift for strategy and was being mentored by Theron's second-in-command. The boy who couldn't control his shift had found peace through meditation techniques taught by Mira. The twins had each other, and a pack that understood grief didn't make you weak. Watching them flourish had healed something in me I hadn't known was wounded. I'd also begun working with other Omegas from various packs, wolves who'd been marginalized or abused, offering them sanctuary and training in the capital. Word had spread quickly. The Omega Queen who'd challenged an alpha was building something new, a support system for the wolves who'd been overlooked. Some alphas had protested, claiming I was undermining pack hierarchy, but Theron had stood firm. Strength comes in many forms, he'd told the Council of Alphas. A pack that can't recognize and nurture all those forms is a pack that will eventually fall. My queen is building the future, and you can either adapt or be left behind. His support had been unwavering, but he'd never taken over, never tried to fight my battles for me. He'd been my partner, my backup, my steady presence, but he'd let me forge my own path, make my own mistakes, and claim my own victories. The greatest test had come 6 months after I'd defeated Marcus, when representatives from Silvermoon had approached me with a petition. They wanted me to be their alpha. The pack Marcus had led into corruption and cruelty wanted the Omega he'd despised to lead them forward. I'd been stunned, uncertain, afraid of returning to the place that had hurt me so deeply. But Theron had simply asked, "What do you want to do?" and I'd realized I wanted to heal Silvermoon the way I'd been healed, by showing them that strength and compassion weren't mutually exclusive, that a pack could be powerful without being cruel. I'd accepted, and I'd become the first Omega Alpha in recorded history, leading Silvermoon while also serving as queen to the royal pack through my bond with Theron. It was exhausting, complex work, but it was also deeply fulfilling. I'd dismantled the harsh training programs that had traumatized so many pups, replacing them with systems that built confidence alongside capability. I'd opened the territory to Omegas from other packs who needed sanctuary. I'd created councils where every wolf, regardless of rank, could voice concerns and propose solutions. Slowly, Silvermoon had transformed from a place of fear into a place of growth, and I'd transformed with it. From a broken Omega into a leader who understood that true strength was about lifting others up, not pushing them down. Tonight, standing on the balcony of the manor I now shared with Theron, looking out over the territory that had become my home, I reflected on how far I'd come. Luna and the other pups were inside, laughing over dinner, safe and loved. Silvermoon was thriving under new leadership that valued all its members. The network of Omega sanctuaries I'd established was spreading across pack territories, changing attitudes and saving lives. And Theron, my mate, my partner, my king, was approaching from behind, his arms wrapping around me with familiar warmth. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured against my hair. "How strange life is," I said softly. A year ago, I was the weakest wolf in my pack, living in a cabin at the edge of territory, waiting to die. Now I'm a queen and an alpha, and I have a mate who sees me as strong. I leaned back against him. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and none of this will be real." Theron turned me in his arms, his golden eyes serious. "It's real, Sage, and your strength isn't something I gave you or that breaking the curse revealed. It was always there, in every choice you made, every kindness you showed, every moment you chose to keep going when giving up would have been easier. All I did was help remove the obstacles that kept others from seeing what I saw from the very beginning, that you were exactly what this world needed." He kissed me then, deep and claiming and tender, and through the mate bond I felt his absolute certainty, his unchanging love. When we broke apart, I smiled, a real smile that still felt new and precious. "Then I suppose we should keep building this world together," I said. "Keep showing everyone that strength comes in many forms." "Together," Theron agreed, his hand finding mine and squeezing gently. "Always together." The future stretched before us, full of challenges and changes, but I faced it without fear. I was Sage, once broken, now whole. Once weak, now strong. Once rejected, now chosen. I was the Omega who'd become queen, the wolf who'd proven that true strength wasn't about physical power, but about courage, compassion, and the will to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. My pack had seen me as weak, but my Alpha King had seen me as his strength. And in the space between those two perspectives, I'd found myself, the real me, the me I was always meant to be. And as the moon rose over our territory, casting silver light over wolves who finally understood that every member of the pack had value, I howled, a sound of triumph and joy and belonging that echoed across the valley and into the future we were building together. One choice, one act of kindness, one moment of courage at a time. If Sage's journey from outcast to queen inspired you, show some love in the comments and subscribe for more stories where the underdog becomes unstoppable.